Hello and welcome back to the Drought-Proof Garden. So prior to the start of this year's spring and summer garden season, I made the decision to document the mass of my harvest for the first time ever. I did this primarily to satisfy curiosity about how much food I was producing from my relatively small 400 square feet of backyard garden space. So every time we harvested veggies during the spring and summer season, which I define as from March 1st through October 1st around here, said harvest was weighed and the data was entered into a spreadsheet. Over the last few weeks, I've been running the numbers to determine totals in terms of mass, caloric yield, and approximate dollar value. So in this video, I'm going to touch on this past season's most successful crops, tallying the totals by variety, and then by the grand total at the end. So without any further preamble, here's how the season went. So most of our tomato space this year was devoted to various paste and sauce tomatoes. The reason is we like to jar and shelve a lot of things like salsa and marinara sauce, or just whole peeled tomatoes. So it makes a lot more sense for us to do a lot of the kinds of tomatoes that are easier to process, peel, de-seed, etc., than it is to do a ton of slicing in cherry tomatoes, which are typically best eaten fresh, though they are good dried. The San Marzanos, which I have pictured here, they did really well, although we did have some blossom end rot issues with them. I'd say we lost maybe a quarter of all of our San Marzano fruits to blossom end rot. But still, we had a total of 8 plants going, two stems per plant, 2 main stems producing, and that gave us a total of 78.5 pounds of San Marzano tomatoes. That works out to be about 9.8 pounds per plant. A new sauce and paste tomato variety for us this year were these Rio Grande tomatoes, shown in frame right now. These were an awesome surprise for us. In spite of being a determinate tomato variety that capped out at maybe 2 feet in height and had a small footprint, they were unexpectedly prolific. And additionally, the fruits they produced were almost completely free of blossom end rot. They were highly blossom end rot resistant. On top of that, the ripe fruits had a really long shelf life. A thin-skinned paste tomato like a San Marzano, I noticed those will start shriveling up in maybe a few days left out on the counter, while a ripe Rio Grande seemed like those would keep for a couple of weeks. They weren't quite as productive as the San Marzanos, which is to be expected, as San Marzanos are determinate and will keep producing, as long as the plant is alive. But still, our 8 Rio Grande plants that we had growing yielded a total of 62.2 pounds of good usable fruit. That works out to be about 7.8 pounds per plant. Unlike the Rio Grandes, our other experimental variety of sauce tomato this year, the Aroma, didn't pan out very well at all. Not only did most of the seedlings I started die before transplants, it turned out that they were highly susceptible to blossom end rot, in spite of my research indicating that they were a very heat tolerant and blossom end rot resistant variety. That turned out to just not be the case. We had only 3 plants make it to transplant. I will say that the fruits that did develop and ripen were really amazing. They were huge. They were very flavorful, actually, for a sauce tomato, and almost seedless, which is a really nice feature for a sauce tomato. But we just lost, like I said, maybe a third of everything that those 3 plants produced to rot. So those 3 plants, like I said, they produced a total of 15.8 pounds of usable fruit. Works out to be about 5.3 pounds per plant. Our one and only slicing tomato variety this summer was the tried and true heirloom Cherokee Purple. These have become a favorite of ours, not just for their tremendously rich and sweet flavor, but also for the fact that they seem to really thrive in the hot and dry conditions of the Sacramento area during the summer. This is, I think, our second year growing these and having great success with them. So we're just kind of sticking with what really works for the area when it comes to slicers. So we had 5 plants of these going. Again, these are a non-determinate, so I pruned them down to 2 productive stems per plant. That all yielded us a total of 54 pounds, and that works out to be 10.8 pounds per plant. One of 2 cherry tomato varieties we grew this summer was the black cherry, shown here in the green phase. Unfortunately, I messed up. I didn't realize you don't really want to aggressively prune down non-determinate cherry tomatoes in an extreme fashion like I did here. I cut it down to 2 stems. That really will limit production. Also, not too long into its life, our 2 black cherry plants were afflicted with some kind of, I'm thinking, a fungal ailment that ultimately killed the plant and limited its overall yield. So these 2 plants trimmed down to 2 productive stems apiece. They only gave us 6 pounds, about 3 pounds per plant. So that was kind of a fail on our part, but that does happen. And the tomatoes we did get out of it were good, so I'm not going to complain too much there. I also had one sun gold cherry tomato plant growing this year that I initially pruned down to 2 stems, but then after that, just let the suckers go and do what they may. This was not killed off by the same fungal affliction that killed off the black cherry tomato plants. So we got a lot more out of this plant. This gave us a total of 8 pounds over the season. And, sun gold cherry tomatoes, they're like garden candy. You can't beat them. All said and done, we wound up with a total of 224 and a half pounds across all varieties this spring and summer. A surprise success for us this year was potatoes. I've mentioned many times that potatoes are a bit of a challenge for us here in the Sacramento Valley. They are both frost sensitive and heat sensitive, and they're also a crop that takes a really long time to produce a good tuber. So you can start a plant and it can, in the beginning of its life, have to worry about frost, and then later in its life, have to worry about a heat wave. However, this year we had a really weirdly mild spring. So the potatoes that I planted, some of them I planted in January, some as late as March. They made it all the way up into July before the leaves started really yellowing and dying, and I decided to pull them. I didn't think to get a count before I harvested on the exact number of plants, but we had about a dozen grow bags and small planters of them of different sizes going, and a number of varieties. The most prolific variety was the Yukon Gold. The other various ones, I just grabbed handfuls of starter seed potatoes at a local nursery. But the total across all varieties for these potatoes was 35 pounds. That's not obviously amazing in the grander scheme of things, but it was amazing for us. We've never had that big of a potato harvest at any given time. So I was pretty happy with that, pretty encouraged. And the success that I had with these potatoes here from, late winter through our early summer, it motivated me to really put a lot more time and energy into potatoes over this winter. So I was really happy about this. All right, on to cucumbers. Our most prolific cucumber variety over the summer was the Armenian cucumber, which technically isn't a cucumber. It's a kind of muskmelon. However, it tastes, in my opinion, indistinguishable from any other cucumber you find at the grocery store, and it doesn't require peeling, which is really nice. These are very heat and drought tolerant, which is why we always grow these during the summer. They do great in pretty adverse conditions. Anyway, we had 8 plants of these going, gave us a total of 31 pounds. That works out to be about 3.9 pounds, call it 4 pounds per plant. We also grew a dedicated pickling variety this summer, the Boston pickling cucumber. These didn't produce quite as much as the Armenian cukes, which that was to be expected. The Armenian cukes are just perfect for our climate. Boston picklers, they did okay, but I'm not sure that super hot, super dry is their jam, so to speak. But we had a total of 10 plants going over the summer. total of 11 pounds. So that's really right around a pound per plant. Not too bad. I still have a fridge full of dill pickles. Probably won't be using those up entirely before spring rolls around. So pretty happy with that overall as well. With both varieties combined together, we wound up with a total harvest weighing 41.5 pounds. Most of the winter squash varieties we grew this year were of a bush variety, like these golden nugget squash shown here. This is good in one way in that the bush varieties, they don't take up a huge footprint. They don't take over your garden like vining squash will. But unfortunately, bush varieties also don't have the same degree of production as the climbing, vining, take over everything kinds of winter squash. So, for instance, I wound up with 3 plants. I had room for 3 plants of these golden nugget squash, which I think look really, really cool, and I like them. But they only gave us about a total of 10 pounds of fruit across 3 plants. So that works over to, a little over 3 pounds per plant. Nothing to really write home about there, but it ultimately worked out okay. Another bush variety winter squash we had going this year was Burpee's Butterbush. This is a variety of butternut squash. I really love the flavor of these. They're almost a little too sweet for any dish that isn't a dessert treat. We had a total of 6 plants of these going, and that they all in total yielded 33 pounds of usable fruit, which works out to be, of course, about 11 pounds per plant. Very happy with these. These are going to stay in the rotation. I'm not sure about the golden nugget squash next year. My favorite squash of the season turned out to be completely unintentional. A volunteer squash seedling sprouted around the base of that wine barrel planter you see in the frame, and I kind of just rolled with it to see what would happen. And my best guess is this is a hybrid from last year's Hubbard squash that I planted, a specific variety called Sweet Meat, and I think it crossed with one of my golden nuggets last year to make these really kind of neat looking um, squat pumpkins, basically. That turned out that they were really good to eat too. Not quite as sweet as the butterbush, which is a really good thing because if I want a soup or a pasta dish with a nice creamy squash sauce, I don't necessarily want that to be overwhelmingly sweet. So I actually decided after harvesting these, I liked the way they looked and tasted so much. I saved seeds, so I'm going to try planting these again next year on purpose, knowing full well they may have cross pollinated with yet another variety. So it's almost kind of, for lack of a better term, exciting, wondering what the fruits will look like next generation. In total, this completely unexpected bonus squash plant gave us 24 pounds of delicious usable fruit. My big failure in terms of squash this year were these Seminole pumpkins. I overloaded the 6 by 6 foot raised bed with way too many plants. There were 10 to 12 packed in there. And I think that it really just hampered production to the point where we only got two mature fruits out of the whole thing. Most of the fruits would start forming and then would shrivel up and drop off before they really went anywhere. I'm taking full blame for that one. I think that they would have thrived in the Sacramento climate had I not decided to cram a dozen plants into 36 square feet. But that notwithstanding, we wound up with a pretty decent overall winter squash harvest, given the space I have for them. It turned out to be a total of 68 pounds. Since we've had mixed success with sweet potatoes in the past, I only planted a limited amount of them this year. I devoted a total of 18 square feet of garden space to sweet potatoes, all of which were started from grocery store tubers out of the organic section. Got those to sprout, got the slips to roots, and went from there. Actually didn't do too bad this year, given, again, only a total of 18 square feet. We wound up getting a total of 35 pounds of sweet potatoes out of this. And a lot of the tubers were enormous. I was really surprised. We got some that were pretty close to football sized. Might be a little hyperbolic, but they bigger than I could fit in my hand. So, pretty pleased with the sweet potatoes we did get this year. I was initially on the fence as to whether or not to include the eggs our chickens produce throughout the spring and summer, along with the rest of my harvest numbers, but I reasoned that since they eat a lot of stuff we grow in the garden and use that food for egg production, it was fair to include that. So, for the period March 1st through October 1st, our chickens gave us a total of 20 dozen eggs. And that's enough for us to have an egg-based meal at least once a week in our household. All right, so since this video is starting to drag on a bit, I'm going to be as efficient as I can with the grand totals. From March 1st to October 1st, we harvested a total of 425 pounds of produce, which works out to about 1 pound per square foot of growable space that I have. I don't know if that's considered a lot in the grander scheme of things, but I feel like it's really nothing to scoff at. Out of curiosity, I also totaled an estimated total caloric yield for the harvests, and this includes eggs, and I came up with a little over 77,000 calories. Now, at a glance, that looks like a large number, but it's actually just barely enough to meet the basic needs of my wife, my daughter, and I for an entire 14 days. I want to emphasize that I'm not a gloom and doom type, and I don't think I'm going to need to garden my way through a zombie apocalypse anytime soon. Caloric yield was just another data set I was curious about. Now, on to the dollar value. This was a bit trickier to estimate as the price of produce and eggs are constantly fluctuating, and I didn't think to track retail prices over the entirety of the season to determine an average. I honestly just went online recently and did some Googling, so take these numbers with a huge grain of salt. I also want to point out that I didn't calculate price based on an exact retail replacement, but on the cheapest possible grocery store replacement. To elaborate, if I didn't grow Cherokee purple tomatoes and wanted a slicing tomato for a burger, I wouldn't be spending $6 a pound at a farmer's market for an heirloom. We're on a budget, so we'd honestly be buying one of those pale pink numbers from Walmart that have the taste and mouthfeel of wet paper. So using the prices of the cheapest possible grocery store equivalents of the crops we grew this summer as a baseline, I very roughly estimate our harvest had an $800 replacement cost. Now, being able to avoid the produce section of any grocery store on a busy Saturday is absolutely priceless, so that's a bonus. Now, while gardening certainly is not all about the numbers, I found this exercise gratifying. It can honestly be fun to quantify a hobby now and then. And I kind of wonder if I can break a half a ton of produce next year without cheating and only growing pumpkins. So thanks again for watching. Double thanks to those of you who stuck around all the way to the end. And I'll see you next time.